He said it mid-bite, like he was asking me to pass the salt. I think we should get a DNA test for Matthew. Just like that. No preface. No warning. Just words tossed into the air like they didn't have the weight to shatter the room. I looked up, fork still in my hand, chewing something that suddenly felt like concrete. Sorry. It came out quieter than I meant. But he didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. He just stared at me, face blank, knife cutting through the chicken like it didn't belong to someone he loved. 15 years. That's how long we'd had together. Married. Stable. Maybe not fiery, but steady. A mortgage. A garden. A child with eyes like mine and Greg's stubborn jawline. I couldn't move. Why would you say that? He wiped his mouth with a napkin, folded it neatly, placed it beside his plate. I just think it would clear a few things up. He didn't elaborate. Didn't look guilty. Didn't even look angry. Just distant. Like he had rehearsed this. Like the decision had already been made without me. I thought of Matthew upstairs, probably watching a YouTube video with his headphones on, probably wondering why dinner was so quiet. He had no idea that downstairs, his life was being questioned in 4 words. I asked again, "Where is this coming from?" He shrugged. "You've always been close with Dennis." And there were a few things, timeline-wise. Dennis, my ex from before Greg, before marriage, before responsibility, the one I hadn't even spoken to in over a decade. The accusation hit me like a fever, slow at first, then all-consuming. "You think Matthew isn't yours?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was louder than a yes. I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to cry, maybe, but all I did was set my fork down and feel something inside me begin to crack. 15 years. Of loyalty. Of compromise. Of folding myself smaller to make space for us. Of saying yes when I wanted to say maybe. Of building a life brick by careful brick. And now, with no evidence, no reason beyond paranoia and pride, he wanted to pull it all apart. I stood up, carried my plate to the sink, turned on the water just so I wouldn't have to hear myself breathe. Behind me, he spoke again. "It's just a test. No big deal. No big deal." He went to bed early that night. I stayed up, folding laundry that didn't need folding, watching a show I couldn't follow, counting the sounds of the refrigerator and wondering how many lies could hide behind just a test. The next morning, he sent me a link. A lab appointment already scheduled. Saturday at noon. He even offered to drive. How thoughtful. I stared at my coffee for a long time. Bitter. Cold. And suddenly not enough. I didn't tell Matthew. Not yet. I didn't know how. "What do you say?" "Your father doesn't believe you're his." And worse, he thinks I lied. The truth was, I didn't know what to believe anymore. Not about Matthew. He was mine. He always would be. But about Greg. About this version of him I didn't recognize. This man who looked at our life and saw a question mark. I called Denise that night. My sister. She always answered on the second ring. He asked for a what? I told her. Voice low. Words tripping over each other like they wanted to run away. She didn't say much at first. Just breathed heavy into the phone. Then said, "He's always been good at building walls when he's scared of the truth." I didn't sleep. I laid beside Greg, listened to the rhythm of his breath, and wondered if the person lying next to me was already halfway out the door. I looked at Matthew's door on my way to the kitchen. It was cracked open. He was asleep, headphones still on, peaceful. He didn't know that everything was shifting, that in 2 days, he'd be part of a test he never asked for. I touched the doorknob, considered waking him, telling him, but what was I going to say? That the people meant to protect him were starting to doubt each other? That love sometimes splits at the seams over nothing at all? No, I would let him sleep one more night in the world before it changed. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and paperwork. Sterile, stiff, like it had been designed to make people feel small and exposed at the same time. Matthew sat between us, swinging his legs, head down in his hoodie. He thought we were there for a routine checkup. Something about blood work. Dad said it's for school stuff. I didn't correct him. I couldn't. Greg filled out the paperwork, his handwriting sharper than usual, like he needed the pen to draw boundaries between us. The nurse called our name. The test was fast. Cotton swab, sealed envelope, robotic voice explaining timelines and contact info. Results in 5 to 7 business days. Just enough time to tear a family apart in slow motion. On the way home, Matthew asked if we could stop for fries. Greg said no. His voice was clipped. Not cruel, but hard enough to bruise without leaving a mark. Matthew didn't ask again. At home, Greg went to his office. He always did that when he wanted distance but didn't want to admit it. He said it was for work, but I knew better. He hadn't looked me in the eyes since the test. I spent the next 9 days trying to stay upright, cooking dinner, doing laundry, answering Matthew's questions with half smiles and lies I hated myself for. One night, I knocked on the office door. "Do you want to talk about it?" He didn't even look up. "There's nothing to talk about until we get the results." That sentence stayed with me. Until we get the results. Like my word meant nothing. Like 15 years of shared life, shared bills, shared nights spent comforting a colicky baby had all been filed under pending. I started watching him. Not intentionally, just unconsciously. His phone had a new lock screen code. He was taking calls in the garage again. His laptop shut faster when I walked into the room. Paranoia is contagious, I guess. I didn't want to be suspicious, but he had planted that seed, and it was growing in every quiet space between us. On day 4, Matthew asked me point blank, "Did I do something wrong?" My heart cracked clean down the middle. "No, baby, you didn't." "Is Dad mad at me?" "No, he's just stressed," he nodded. But I could see it in his eyes. The doubt. He was old enough to feel the shift, but too young to name it. I went outside that night, stood in the backyard barefoot, let the cold grass remind me that I was still here, still breathing. Even if everything inside me felt like it was unraveling. I called Denise again. "What if the test says he's not Matthew's father?" "But he is," she said. "I know." "But what if it doesn't?" There was silence on the line. "Then, he's yours. Don't let numbers make you forget that." On day 7, the lab sent a text. "Results available. Click to view." I didn't open it. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, phone in my hand, and stared at the message like it could rewrite time. Greg walked in. "We should look together." I nodded. Not because I wanted to, but because there was no more running left to do. We opened it on the kitchen counter. Matthew was upstairs, headphones in, still in his world. The report was plain. Medical. Soulless. Probability of paternity, 0%. Greg exhaled. But it wasn't relief. It was something worse. Confirmation. He turned to me. I knew it. And then the doctor's note continued. Note, sample does not match mother's submitted DNA either. I froze. What? Greg leaned in. Reread it. What the hell does that mean? The line again. The child in question is not a biological match to the listed mother or father. The room went silent. Cold. Like the air had been vacuumed out of it. This has to be a mistake, I said. Is this a typo? Greg didn't answer. He just stared at me like I had become a stranger in my own home. I sank into a chair, tried to breathe, tried to remember the hospital, the delivery, the smell of antiseptic and hope. The nurse who handed me Matthew while I was still groggy from anesthesia. The smile I gave him. The first time he opened his eyes. You switched something, Greg snapped. You must've. Don't. My voice was low. Shaking. I carried that boy. I bled for him. Don't you dare. He didn't yell again. But he didn't stay. He grabbed his keys. Left the door open behind him. I sat there with a printed page and a silence so loud I couldn't hear anything else. My son was mine. I knew it in my bones. But science said otherwise. And suddenly, I didn't know which truth to hold on to. I stayed in that chair for hours. The house didn't feel like a house anymore. It felt like a lie held together by drywall and denial. The paper still sat on the table, taunting me, black ink on white space, as if something so clinical could erase 15 years of life with a single line. Probability of paternity, 0%. Probability of maternity, 0%. What does that even mean? How can you raise someone, feed them, hold them through fevers and nightmares, and then be told, this child isn't yours? But I remembered everything. The pregnancy, the nausea, the cravings, the swollen ankles, the contractions that came too fast, the emergency C-section. I remembered waking up groggy, Greg beside me. A nurse with kind eyes saying, he's healthy. Perfect. I remembered the wristband they put on my son. And how mine matched. So how could this be? Was the hospital wrong? Was the test wrong? Or was I, somehow, wrong about everything? Greg came home after midnight. He didn't speak, just went straight to the guest room. His footsteps were loud, like he wanted me to hear his absence. The next morning, I made pancakes. Habit. Matthew wandered in, rubbing his eyes. Morning. I smiled. Tried to, anyway. Morning, baby. He sat at the counter, feet swinging. Still the same. But now, the voice in my head whispered, is he? Greg didn't come down. He didn't even text. I didn't ask. Some silences aren't worth breaking. I called the lab. Twice. Got the same woman both times. Her name was Claire. The results are accurate, she said gently. But that's not possible, I said. I carried him. I was in labor. I have pictures. Claire was quiet for a second. Ma'am, sometimes there are mix-ups. Not common, but it's happened. Mix-ups. Like babies were receipts that got misfiled. I hung up, pacing the kitchen, every breath shallow. Then I grabbed the photo box, the one I hadn't touched in years. Inside, the hospital bracelet, Matthew's newborn photo, a receipt from the gift shop where Greg bought me a stuffed giraffe. I held the bracelet in my palm. It still had the faintest scent of baby powder and thyme. I turned it over. Hashtag 1321, H the same as Matthew's. I remember matching them. I remember watching the nurse click the bands together like a lock. I needed answers. Not guesses. Not theories. Answers. I called the hospital. Patient records department. How can I help you? I had a C-section in your maternity ward 15 years ago. I need to speak to someone about a possible error. The woman paused. You'll need to make that request in writing. HIPAA regulations. I'm the mother. I understand, but these records are archived, and anything involving minors is sealed past 10 years without legal cause. Sealed. Like a truth buried under red tape and locked drawers. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in silence. Again. I called Denise. The test came back, and Greg's not the father. I waited, and neither am I. The line went dead. For a second I thought she hung up. Then, softly, Jesus, Helen. I told her everything. From the C-section to the test to the hospital stonewall. You think he was switched? I don't know what to think. You need a lawyer. I hadn't even thought that far. I was still trying to breathe. That night, Greg came down while I was folding laundry. He stood in the doorway, eyes red, jaw tight. "So what now?" he asked. "I'm going to find out the truth," I said. "Even if it means he's not yours?" "Not mine." "He's still mine," he nodded. Once. Like he didn't believe me. Then he walked away. Again. I sat on Matthew's bed that night, watched him sleep, his face soft, safe. He mumbled in his dreams, something about dodgeball. I tucked the blanket tighter around him, and whispered, "I don't care what any test says. You are mine, and I will fix this, even if it meant tearing open the past, even if it meant unraveling my whole world to find the thread that was real." The hospital hadn't changed much. Same beige walls. Same waiting room chairs that looked comfortable but never were. Same faint smell of hand sanitizer and old coffee. 15 years ago, I was rolled down this hallway, pregnant, terrified, clutching Greg's hand like it was the last thing anchoring me to the earth. I remember the panic, the beeping monitors, the sudden decision for surgery. I remember waking up groggy, numb from the waist down, with a nurse handing me a baby and saying, "He's perfect." But now I wasn't a new mother. Now I was a woman with questions, and I had come to get answers. I waited 42 minutes for someone from records. Then a woman named Diana Lively came out, mid-50s, kind eyes, tight bun, a face that looked like it had seen things and learned to carry them anyway. "You said you had a question about a birth in 2009? My son was born here. Emergency C-section. Room 207. But recent medical records say he's not biologically mine." Her eyebrows lifted. Not shocked, but not casual either. She asked for the birth date, the time, my name, then excused herself to go check archived files. 20 minutes later, she returned with a clipboard. "I found your file. You were brought in around 3:17 a.m. Baby delivered at 4:02. Complications with the placenta." I nodded. "Do you remember the staff?" "No. I was barely conscious after surgery." She hesitated. "There were 3 births that night. Yours was the only C-section. The other 2 were vaginal deliveries down the hall. So, you were moved to recovery, but there was staff confusion that week. 2 nurses out sick. 1 on-call replacement." I leaned forward. "Was there a mistake?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her folder and pulled out a photocopied shift schedule. Highlighted in yellow, Mara Penbrook, L&D nurse, temp coverage. She only worked 2 shifts that month. "You were one of them." I stared at the name, as if it would jog something. A face. A voice. Anything. But there was nothing. Just a name and a wave of something sharp in my gut. "Can I talk to her?" "She left nursing. Moved out of state, I believe." "Where?" "I don't know. But I might be able to find her through alumni records. She was in my training class years ago." I nodded, grateful, but rattled. On the way home, I called Denise. I found a name. Mara Penbrook. She was working the night Matthew was born. What does that mean? I don't know yet, but something feels off. Like she was the one who handed me the wrong child. He's not a file folder, Helen. I know. But this file changed everything. That night, I told Greg what I found. He didn't respond. Didn't look at me. Just stared out the window and said, "You're still chasing this?" I didn't answer. Because it wasn't about chasing. It was about finding. Diana emailed 2 days later. She goes by Mara Jennings now. Owns a flower shop in Franklin, 2 hours away. I didn't think. I just packed a bag, left Matthew with Denise, and drove. The shop was small, tucked between a diner and a bakery. Mara's garden, painted in soft blue cursive on the window. Sunflowers in the display. a white cat curled up near the counter. She didn't recognize me. Not right away. But when I said, "You worked the maternity shift on April 9, 2009, room 207, her eyes shifted. Like a tide pulling back. "I don't do that anymore," she said. "I'm not here to report you. I'm just here for the truth." She looked down. At her hands. At the floor. Then whispered, "I knew this day would come." Mara didn't cry. Not the way I thought she would. Her eyes welled, sure. Her voice cracked. But her face stayed still, like someone who had carried something for far too long to collapse now. "We were short-staffed that night," she began. "The ward was chaos. I was called in last minute. 3 deliveries, 1 emergency C-section, 2 new nurses." She looked at me. "Your son was in the recovery ward with 2 others. We logged everything manually. But someone rushed the ID tag swap. I didn't speak. Couldn't. My heart was beating in my throat. I remember carrying a baby to room 207, she said. But the clipboard had smeared ink. I double-checked the band, but..." She paused. I wasn't sure. I stood there, hands shaking. "You weren't sure if the baby you gave me was mine?" I wanted to say something. But once you held him, once you smiled, I told myself I was wrong. And then it was too late. I turned away. Looked at the hydrangeas in the window. The sun catching on their soft blues. A color too gentle for this moment. "His name is Matthew," I said. "He's 15. He plays trumpet. He hates eggs." Mara smiled. Then cried. "For real this time. You deserve to know where he came from," she said. She pulled a notepad from behind the counter. Wrote down a name. Lorna Hall. She gave birth to a son that same night. Same weight. Same length. Room 203. My hands shook as I took the paper. "She's married. Lives about 30 minutes from here." I kept tabs, just in case. Just in case. Like she knew one day the truth would come knocking with my face. I drove to Lorna's house without thinking. Map open. Heart closed. I didn't tell Greg. Didn't tell Denise. Didn't even let myself process what came next. I just knew that if there was a version of my son growing up in another home, I had to see him. The house was quiet. Modest. White porch. Wind chimes. I knocked. A woman answered. Red hair. Soft eyes. A tired expression that reminded me of someone who had held everything together for too long. "Lorna." "Yes." My name is Helen. I believe our sons were switched at birth." Her face changed. Not shock. Not disbelief. Just recognition. Like she had known deep down but never had the proof. She stepped back. "Let me in." We sat at her kitchen table. Lemon-scented cleaner. A stack of mail. Half a cup of cold coffee. She said his name was Jacob. He was taller than most boys his age. Quiet. Drew a lot. Liked science. She said she always felt like something was missing. A disconnect. He never really looked like me. Or his father. But I figured genes are weird. I told her about Matthew. How he laughed with his whole chest. How he still held my hand when no one was looking. How he felt like home from the moment they placed him in my arms. She cried. I did too. Not because of loss, but because something had been named that we both carried in silence for 15 years. We agreed to get tested. Matthew and Jacob. No pressure. No announcements. Just answers. 3 days later, we had them. Jacob, biological child of Helen and Greg. Matthew, biological child of Lorna and her husband. I sat with the paper in my lap and felt like the air had shifted again. I called Greg. Told him. His voice didn't crack. We should have never taken that test. I almost agreed. But then I looked at Matthew, who still called me Mom, still smiled when I handed him orange slices after practice. and I knew I wouldn't take a single moment back. I told him everything that night, slowly, carefully. He didn't speak at first, just looked at me. So, I'm not really yours? No, you're really mine, just not by blood. His eyes filled, but he didn't pull away. He leaned into me and whispered, "You'll always be Mom." They met at the park. Jacob and Matthew. Two boys, the same age, from two different lives that were supposed to be one. They didn't hug, didn't cry, didn't ask questions with words. They just stared at each other for a long moment, like mirrors trying to understand what was missing. Jacob spoke first. "You play trumpet?" "Yeah," Matthew nodded. "You?" "No, I draw." That was it. Then they sat on the swings and let the wind fill in the silence their parents couldn't. Lorna and I sat on the bench, watching, waiting, holding two truths at the same time. I told her about Matthew's first steps. She told me about Jacob's first scar. We laughed, a little, but beneath it all was something heavy and holy. Grief for what we didn't get, gratitude for what we got. The weeks that followed were strange. We didn't switch kids. We didn't trade stories like trading cards. We just started showing up. A visit here, a shared dinner, a science fair, a trumpet recital. Matthew never called her Mom. Jacob never called me anything at all. But slowly, the space between us became something softer. Not replacement, not correction, just connection. Greg filed for divorce. Quietly. No anger. Just paperwork. He'd been seeing someone else. Someone from work. I wasn't surprised. The distance had started long before the test. This just made it official. He took his things. Left a note. "Sorry for everything." I folded it. Put it in a drawer I don't open often. Denise helped me reorganize the house. New paint in Matthew's room. Rosemary in the kitchen window. "It smells like calm," she said. I needed that. Matthew started drawing. Not well, but enough to ask Jacob for tips. They weren't brothers. Not in the legal sense. Not in the blood sense. But they were something. They understood each other in a way no one else could. And maybe that was enough. One night, Matthew asked me, "Do you ever wish you got Jacob instead?" I froze. "Do you?" I asked. He thought about it, then shrugged. "Nah. You yell better." We laughed. Then he said, "But it's weird, knowing there's a version of me that could have grown up somewhere else." I nodded. "Yeah. But I like this version." He smiled. Real soft. The kind of smile that stays with you long after the moment ends. I still keep both boys' birth bracelets. Matthew's and Jacob's. I don't know what to do with them. Can't throw them away. Can't frame them either. So I keep them tucked in a small wooden box beside a candle labeled Second Chances. It smells like cedar. And clarity. People ask sometimes, "How do you feel about what happened?" I tell them, he's still my son. I didn't raise a blood type. I raised a human being. And sometimes, the truth isn't what you find in a file or a test result. It's in the way they reach for your hand when they're scared. In the way they call your name when they're proud. In the way they look at you when they realize you were always theirs. And they were always yours. No matter how it started. He wasn't born from me. But he became mine the moment I loved him. And that's the kind of truth no DNA can undo.